Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm happy to be here. Not an easy task, but here we are. And I'm going to be talking with you about some more Rotary works. You know, when I was first introduced to Rotary, I had no idea what it was all about. I was a school principal. My superintendent of schools was the president of the Rotary Club. And he was the one who wanted to invite women to join Rotary. So after all these yesterdays that we've had now, we're on the edge of tomorrow and a lot more tomorrows. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Rotary works, how we got into Rotary. You know, at the time that we were entered into Rotary, service above self was the prime consideration for people, service above self. And so when Richard Key wanted to invite women to join Rotary, he was interested in the service that those women could bring to Rotary. Not, he wasn't concerned about their gender or anything else. He was concerned about what they could do as Rotarians. So I'll tell you a little bit about how it went. Okay, so we're on the edge of tomorrow. It's a tomorrow where so many things we're concerned about. The pandemic, is that going to be gone? Are we going to wear masks or are we not going to wear masks on the airplanes? Is polio going to be gone from the world? That's our major task now, is wiping out polio just the way we wiped out smallpox. And so we're busy working on that. So let me tell you a little bit about how all this started with our women in Rotary. Okay, I was a school principal in this small district, and I was interested in knowing what the community was like, because when you serve kids in a community, it helps to know what the kids need. And so I went to the superintendent to ask about the community and what I needed to know. And his response to me was, you don't need to know anything about this community because we have a Rotary Club here and we take care of the community. Well, I didn't know what Rotary was. I didn't know what Kiwanis was. I didn't know Kiwanis was waiting to get into Rotary. No, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about Elks. I knew about Lions because, as a school principal, Lions provide the eyeglasses that we all wear and the glasses that the children wear in school. So I knew about Lions, but I didn't know anything about Rotary because nobody ever talked about Rotary. And it wasn't a name that jumped out at you like Kiwanis or even Elks, okay? So I said, okay, and he said, we're going to invite women to join Rotary. Well, there are no women yet, so I'll have to talk to the district governor. So, Dick was never put off by anything like that. So he went and he talked to the district governor and he said, I have women principals and psychologists and journalists and so on. Why can't I invite women to join Rotary? Well, the district governor was sympathetic and he said, yeah, maybe you have a good idea there, but I tell you what, just to be on the safe side, when you register these women, don't use their full names. Just send in S. Whitlock, could be Stephen Whitlock. M. Elliott could be Michael Elliott. We could use any name. So, of course, what we know now is that didn't pass the four-way test, but that's how the women were registered. And so they came into the club and they did the things that Rotarians do in a club in a small district. And it was a small club, maybe 15 members. And they did Rotary works. Well, they were getting ready to celebrate their 25th anniversary as a Rotary Club. And so Rotary sent representatives from the head office to celebrate with this small club. And of course, they came to the celebration. And while the celebrating was going on, the women were introduced. And they said, we don't have women in Rotary. Where are these women coming from? We don't have women in Rotary. And somebody said, this club does. Well, they were a little undone, but they stayed and they celebrated with the women and the men who were there. And then they went back to Evanston. Well, it didn't take long after they went back to Evanston for them to write, for Evanston to write and to say, hey, we don't have women in Rotary clubs and you guys need to be aware of this. This is something that you need to do. Number one, there are no women in Rotary. Number two, you need to ask the women to leave Rotary. Number three, if the women don't leave, you stop calling yourself a Rotary club because you're not a Rotary club. Well, the Rotarians in Dwighty thought about this long and hard, and they thought, we ought to appeal to the Council of Legislation. You know, that's really interesting because this past week, I served as our district representative to the Council of Legislation, and that's an interesting event. For 5 days, 8 hours a day, we sat and listened to the suggestions that people had to make Rotary better, and we worked through it. And so we thought, well, we'll appeal, and that was my experience with the Council of Legislation. Years after I was an event in the Council of Legislation. So we appealed to the council, and the council said, in fact, the issue that came up wasn't whether women should be in Rotary. It was whether the Rotary Club of Dwighty had violated constitutional bylaws by inviting the women to join. You know, we had appealed first to the board of directors, but they wouldn't hear us because they said, if you have women, you know, you're not a Rotary club. And that's why we went to the Council of Legislation. But when it came up for them, it wasn't an issue about whether women should be in Rotary, but it was whether the Rotary Club had violated the bylaws of Rotary. And of course we had. And so the vote was down against the women was 1,000 to 34. Now I understand what that means for 1,000, all the delegates and the people who were voting at the Council of Legislation. Well, actually, imagine there were 34 people there who thought women should be in Rotary. I met one of those when the convention was in Calgary. And I was on a train riding into the convention center. I was sitting across from a gentleman and his wife, and they were all tagged, you know, all Rotarians are tagged when they go to conventions. And we were all reading each other's pedigree. And the gentleman said, Dwighty, isn't that the club that got women into Rotary? And I smiled, you know, this big smile. And I said, yes, here we are. And he said, you know, I was at COL and I voted to have women in Rotary because I always thought they should be there. And his wife, who had been sitting quietly the whole time, said, well, you know, I didn't think so then, and I don't think so now. And I thought, gee, did I say something wrong? And she said, you know what? We have our men going out to Rotary meetings at night. And we don't want them going out meeting with women and who knows what. And I said, well, you know what? It's not a social club. It's a service club. I mean, by then I knew what a service club was. It's a service club. And she said, that's how I feel about it. But you know, there were a lot of women who felt that way, that they didn't want women in the service clubs because they didn't want their men out there meeting at night with women, and they didn't want it to turn into a social situation. Well, that went down. And you know, that's not the first time that that issue had come up, because some years before, in a club in India, when the COL was in Detroit, a club in India had brought up the issue to change the bylaws to have women. And of course it was voted down and they went away. They didn't care about it. Well, all right. Even more interesting, The Rotary Constitution did not specify that Rotarians had to be men, just persons. That's what it said, persons of good character. But that was a time when there were few women in the workaday world. And because men were the ones engaging in fellowship and business activities, the bylaws just evolved into men of good character. Well, if I could ask Paul Harris a question today, it would be, would you have intentionally excluded women from Rotary? You know, I went in Evanston into the Paul Harris exhibit, and there's a life-size figure of Paul Harris there. And I held his hand and I asked him, I said, would you have excluded women from Rotary? And you know what? He didn't say a single word, not a single solitary word. Well, Jack Davis, who was president of Rotary International at the time, did say the unity of Rotary International was jeopardized by the unilateral move of the Duarte Club. He wasn't very excited about us. So they sent a small delegation to Duarte, and they asked us if we were not going to have the women leave. They asked us to return our charter. And we had to surrender our charter. They didn't want us to be a Rotary Club. And so one of our members, Bill Brooks at the time, said, you know what? That's okay. We won't call ourselves a Rotary Club. We'll put a big X over the Rotary insignia. I wish I'd pin, but I'm not at home and I don't have it. But we have the Rotary pin with a big X over it. And we renamed ourselves the ex-Rotary Club of Duarte. And you know something? We were the ex-Rotary Club of Duarte for 11 years, 11 long years. Well, one of our members had a friend in Arcadia, an attorney, Sanford Smith, and he said, you know what? I think we can take this business to the courts. I mean, you know, here we were at Rotary, we were doing all the community stuff that you really don't need to be a Rotarian to do what we had learned to do as Rotarians. And we're doing all the community stuff, but we couldn't do any international stuff because we didn't have Rotary's blessings. And Sanford Smith, you know, said, you know, I think we can take this to the courts to see if we can get women in. Well, you have to remember what the times were like then. You know, having women in clubs was a civil rights issue. But for us, having women in clubs was just a matter of having more people to do the work of Rotary. So we gave Rotary notice that we were going to take the situation to court, and we were going to go to California courts with this. And of course, their response was, I think you need to take this to federal court. But the reason they did that was because a New York club seeking exclusionary rights, not a Rotary club, had an issue in federal court, and the ruling was for them, for the ones who were taking it. And they thought, oh, we'll piggyback on that. But the federal court ruled that it should be heard in California. They didn't want California, board of directors were not all from California, and so they didn't want to do this. Well, the federal court ruled that the case should be heard in the California court, and it was first heard by the California Superior Court, which didn't take much time to rule against us. And it said, Rotary has a right to invite whom it will and to reject whom it will. And so we were summarily dismissed. And we knew, you know, at the time, Service Club, looking for people to do service, we thought this was a perfect case. And this was, how could we lose this? Well, we did the first time. So we had to sit up and take notice. Tell you what, the problem was, we were looking at membership numbers in our club. We were looking at membership numbers. We were not looking at the civil rights issue of this case, the idea of having women able to do the same thing. You know, it was a time when the world was just changing and women were beginning to do the same things that men were doing, but the world didn't see that yet. Well, we knew we'd have to appeal it. And so Sanford looked for a situation to justify his appeal. And of course, he found out that California, as do a lot of other states, had an act called, in our California, it was called the Unruh Act, but it banned discrimination in public accommodation. And Rotary was considered to be public accommodation because of the classification system, and because at that time, maybe 80% of the Rotarians had their dues paid by their employers because it was good for business. So Sanford went to the Court of Appeals, citing the Unruh Act, and immediately the Court of Appeals reversed the decision of the Superior Court. Well, that was when everything interesting started to happen. When that decision came down, Rotary immediately said, we're going to appeal this to the California Superior Court. But the California Superior Court wouldn't take it, wouldn't take the issue. In fact, they were from the decision of the appellate court. And so that was the year that I was coming in as president. And what happens to presidents in Rotary? They all attend pets, all presidents attend pets. And so I was invited to attend pets. But you know, things changed very slowly before women came into Rotary. And so when the invitations were being sent out for pets, why should they change that stock of invitations that had for years that served them well? They thought, we'll just send them out. Well done, have to send one to Sylvia, so we'll just send her one. So they sent me the postcard that told me where and when the pets would be held. And it also reminded me to bring my coat and tie because directory pictures would be taken. Well, I took my coat and tie and met with 290 men down in Garden Grove, California, for pets. Interesting pets. There were no female speakers. They were all male speakers, 290 men and one woman. But the men were very cordial, courteous, and interested in what was going on. But you know what the nicest time there was? When they had restroom breaks, can you imagine what it looked like outside the men's restroom? And outside the women's restroom, there was just one person walking into the restroom. So I go into the restroom and I take care of what I take care of. And then I'd come out and I'd say to the guys, you guys can go in there now because there are no other women here. We were the only people in the hotel, okay? There are no other women here. Not even one female speaker. But at the section on Rotary International, I heard our incoming governor discuss the case. And he said, Rotary International will appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And we have every reason to believe we will win. Well, in direct reference to the size of our club, he said, hey, it's just the case of the mouse that roared. Because there were 15 people roaring. You know, we actually made a mouse that had a Rotary icon on its back. And I'm not at home, so I don't have all these pins, and I wish I had remembered to bring them to share them with you. But we had a mouse. I have given most of them away now. We had the Rotary pin with the X over it for the Ex-Rotary Club, and we had the mouse that roared. Well, I didn't think that in 1987, somebody would be appealing a case about women's rights or membership in the service club to the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. You know, I was a school principal. I knew a little bit about Roe versus Wade. Isn't that interesting? Because that's in the news very much now, Roe versus Wade. I also knew about the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, and the discrimination segregation issues. And I thought, those are big cases. Those are cases the Supreme Court hears. Why would they want to hear a case about membership in a service club? See, I wasn't thinking. I was not thinking civil rights. I was not thinking civil rights, and that's where I should have been. Well, RI did appeal because, as one of their attorneys so commonly put it, they're forcing us to take everybody in, just like a motel. Can you imagine? That's what they said. But RI's argument was that the ruling violated their First Amendment's right of association. The Supreme Court took the case, and on May the 4th, 1987, the court found that considering the size, purpose, selectivity, and exclusivity of Rotary's membership, the relationship among the club's members was not of the intimate or the private variety that warranted First Amendment protection. Well, Sandra Day O'Connor was on the court at that time, and writing for the unanimous court, because Sandra did not vote, her husband was a Rotarian, but writing for the unanimous court was Justice Powell. And he argued that many of Rotary's activities, including the meetings, are conducted in the presence of strangers. And women members would not prevent the club from carrying out its purposes, so there was no violation of associational rights. Furthermore, he said, and I want you to hear this, and I'm going to read this because I want you to hear the words he said. Furthermore, he said, even if there were a slight encroachment on the rights of Rotarians to associate, that minimal infringement would be justified since it serves the state's compelling interest in ending sexual discrimination. Read it again. Even if there were a slight encroachment on the rights of Rotarians to associate, that minimal infringement would be justified since it serves the state's compelling interest in ending sexual discrimination, gender discrimination. And there it was. And now the decision was incumbent on all USA clubs, but only USA clubs, because it had to be accepted by the Council of Legislation before it became Rotary clubs all over the world. Okay. The Supreme Court announced the decision early in the morning on the East Coast. I was driving to school, so it was early. It was like 7:30 in the morning. And the news came over the airways. By the time I arrived at school, maybe some 20 minutes later, I think all the media in the world were on my doorstep. So were all the kids wondering, what are all these television cameras doing? It's amazing because it was East Coast announcement. Hey, we had 3 hours to get ready here. And Warren Olney, you remember Warren Olney? He used to be a CBS newscaster. I think he now newscast for NPR. Warren Olney was assigned for the media to come and interview us. So Mary Lou Elliott and I were invited to the superintendent's office, and where we were told that we'd be interviewed by Warren Olney. Well, we sat in the boardroom and we were asked many questions, most of them directed at me because I was the incoming president, the person of consequence in Rotary. I was the incoming president. So I thought I answered them, intelligently. I tried. But near the end of the interview, in fact, we were already on our feet getting ready to leave. I was asked a question you never ask a Rotarian. How did you get selected to be president? What do you think I said? Well, the standard response in Rotary is, well, I don't know. I must have missed the meeting. So in a careless and decidedly unstudied moment, I said, oh, I don't know. I must have missed the meeting. That evening, the story was the top of the news, the first item on news in all. This was big. It was a big civil rights issue. It was the top of the news. And with 4 hours of copy, guess what they played? You guys can look it up. They played that inane and embarrassing moment when I said, oh, I don't know, I must have missed the meeting. And can you imagine there are people sitting out there in the world who said for 11 years, we waited to hear this? Oh, well. I started to learn then of the capriciousness of the media. And I knew that I was going to have to adopt a more serious mode. There was a camera in my face. I needed to do a little better. Well, back at the club, we had to move our meeting place because we couldn't accommodate the press and the visitors who were ever so curious. I learned how to be circumscribed in this and all answers that I would give to the case. This was also my year as incoming president, and I had to settle into the goals we had set. And if you can imagine, this was when Polio Plus started. That was one of the goals. And of course, I knew the whole world was going to be watching us. Well, we had some interesting telephone calls after this decision, including one that asked if the food were any better now that there were women in Rotary. And I explained very carefully that we weren't cooking it, that we were eating the same rubber chicken the men ate. Okay, well, some of the questions were decidedly less pleasant. This was before DEI, so I got questions that referenced DEI. We didn't get a welcome back from Rotary International, but we did get a new dues schedule, which meant, hey, we know that you're there. And of course, in 1989, after an impassioned plea by Frank Devlin, who explained how the world had changed, the Council on Legislation voted to accept women members into Rotary. Well, that was 1987 of the Supreme Court decision, 1989 COL, and it took until 2004 that the Rotarian printed several articles about women in Rotary. And then, are you ready for this? I was the centerfold. Oh, but I was full of clothes. I was wearing a black turtleneck sweater up here. The photographer had advised me that I needed to wear a black turtleneck for the photographs. So, hey, centerfold didn't make any difference. Rotary has removed, finally, the last vestiges of sexist language, so that now they profit most who serve the best. And even more new, a club may not be chartered unless its membership is open, operative word open to both men and women. This did not start as a women's issue, but as a simple attempt to recruit more members into Rotary for service. How successful has that been? Can men and women work together in Rotary? They have. For how many years? It's 1987 and before. Well, maybe 30% of the Rotarians in the US are women, and maybe 27% or so around the world are women, so there's still a lot of room for growth. So that was the beginning of my journey through the humanitarian organization that is Rotary, the realization of the opportunity to serve in an ever-shrinking world, the opportunity to meet men and women who can articulate a need and its solution, no matter how difficult the way or how meager the resources. A lot of people have talked about having women in Rotary and the importance of having women in Rotary. Past President Madriagli said, women serve alongside men in every segment of life. Why not in Rotary? There are construction workers, in education, in medicine, in warehouses. Why not in Rotary? So I was in an incredibly fortunate place when it happened, because it has brought such bounty into my life. It has added this huge purpose in my life, this huge opportunity for service. Well, I have served my district in many positions, including district governor, and I've spoken to zone institutes in my own zone, but also in Kentucky, in Minneapolis, Kansas City, and lots of places. I mean, I've addressed the International Assembly of more than 500 district governors from around the world. And I've had the pleasure of talking to countless clubs here and overseas who are all fascinated by this story. And I have made up in many, including London, where I was the first woman in this club in Clapham. And when they toasted the Queen, as they do in London clubs, when they toasted the Queen, they toasted me on the same glass of champagne. Well, whatever. I participated in NIDS campaigns in India. And one of the things I do in India is support a school for girls started by Deepa Willingham, a school that provides education for girls. And today, when the Rotary president is so involved with the empowerment of women, that school stands strong because education for girls is what is doing that. Well, you know, I live out my grandmother's example for service. I believe that until we meet the needs of people for education, food, clothing, shelter, clean water, healthcare, sound environment, we can't begin to have them respect the concept of peace. Peace, huge thing. One of the enactments of the Council on Legislation was that we make, as part of our strategic plan, positive peace. How important is that today? Always has been, but today it just looms large. I've learned over the years that my community is not just the residential area in which I live, or the town that supports it, or even the state that governs it. We are citizens of the world, where every action, however remote or seemingly far removed, has a ripple effect on us and on all others. To the extent that they are well, we are well. And so I am concerned. I'm concerned about new generations. I am concerned about young people. When we succeed with the help of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, WHO, UNICEF, CDC, all those names that we hear so much of today, when we succeed in eradicating polio, it will only be the second disease eradicated from the face of the earth, the first being the dreaded smallpox. The news that grabs our attention today is what is largely a denial of the diverse people that we are. Rotary has a DEI group working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Keep that in mind as you go through your clubs and you go through your activities. People are still being segmented by race, color, creed, ethnic origin, and sexual orientation. But as Rotarians with worldwide presence, we are conveniently situated to effect change. So I am going off to Texas in a couple of days, literally a couple of days, to a convention, and I will fly. Without my mask, I will wear my mask. Some people may. I flew up here a few days ago. Some people were wearing masks and some did not. But I will wear my mask. Well, I will talk about Rotary to whomever crosses my path. When I fly, I wear my pin. And if you really want to start a conversation, just drop your pin on the floor in front of you. Ever drop anything on the floor in front of you on an airplane? It's hard to pick it up. And you can struggle to pick it up, or you have to be a contortionist to get down there. But if that person who's sitting next to you would make a good Rotarian, they will also help you pick up your pin. And they will wonder what's so important that you're trying to get. And you explain to them, my Rotary pin. And they'll say, Rotary pin? What's Rotary? There's your chance to explain. You get a little blue card that says, what is Rotary? And give it to them. Find out where they live. Tell them how they can join Rotary. Tell them all about it. And you know what? You've told one more person. When you go home and you get ready to go to bed, take it off your shirt and pin it on your pajamas. Your pajamas? Yeah, on your pajamas. And that person with whom you sleep is saying to you, why are you wearing your Rotary pin on your pajamas? And you explain that's because you know how Rotary important should be carried. And so, you know, the next morning, can you just imagine the next day at work, that person, whomever with whom you slept, is in the office at the coffee machine, and they're telling the story about you and the Rotary pin. And that person to whom they're talking is saying, Rotary? What's Rotary? And there's their chance to explain Rotary, and somebody else has heard about it. Well, hey, that's what we do. Even as I work in my community, trying to help those in need, I can probably find people, beneficiaries, people for whom I work, who would make good Rotarians and reach out to help others. It's okay to give them a fish, but teach them to fish and try to get them to fish along with us. I'm a Rotarian in this ever-shrinking world who will work to find others who can help us to make it a happier place, cleaner, more self-sustaining, and more peaceful than it was when I came into it. I will support the fact that Rotary functions on the edge of tomorrow with fine men and women of character who, in service above self, know that they profit most who serve the best. So we're moving into tomorrow, a tomorrow into which we can catapult aimlessly or carefully negotiate entry into. And remember, new generations are our investment into tomorrow with all the other fine men and women of character. Thank you for knowing that Rotary works. Keep trying it. Thank you.